friends, I'm Brian from the channel Brian, and welcome to this very special, very spooky, very Halloweeny video. Okay, so imagine with me here. It's October. You're watching a movie. Which one? Everybody has their personal go-to Halloween movies, but there are ones the general consensus really seems to like. Find me one person who's like, I hate Nightmare Before Christmas. You can't. It's like the most perfect visual essence of Halloween cinema can allow. Hocus Pocus, Coraline, Halloween Town, Axum. When it comes to populist, basic white people pining for Halloween movies, these are what we call the big boys. But just below that are movies that are a bit decentralized and niche. Ghostbusters, Trick or Treat, Nightmare on Elm Street, Rocky Horror, Scream, and of course, Halloween. Maybe you're a cool guy and like The Descent. They're still staples of the genre, but I like my Halloween movie repertoire to not just be a list of my favorite horror movies. Yeah, Halloween and horror go together, so I'm getting the most out of them, but I'd still watch those movies pretty much anytime. I want to take a look at movies that I enjoy well enough, but become deeply elevated by the season to the point where I have an equally good experience watching them as I do my favorites. And today, I want to spread that positivity to you. That's right, you. These are movies that are on the cusp of being considered underrated, where the general public might know about them, but maybe not as essential Halloween cinema like they should be. Horror fans will know all these for sure. I'm not trying to say that I discovered any hidden gems or anything. Something that's just in the next tier of public consciousness that's looking for something to watch every year with Halloween charm other than Hocus Pocus and Nightmare Before Christmas. So let's talk about Jennifer's Body. Jennifer's Body is, the greatest movie ever made.
She can fly.
She's just hovering. It's not that impressive. God, do you have to undermine everything that I do? You are such a player hater.
Megan Fox plays a stereotypical popular high school cheerleader who gets possessed by a demon and starts eating boys to maintain her overwhelming 2009 brand hotness. And her best friend, Amanda Seyfried, has to stop her. It is a horror comedy. One of the most misunderstood movies I've ever seen. I think at the time critics found it difficult to wrap their head around. It doesn't give away its hand easily in terms of how seriously you're supposed to take it. As a straightforward horror movie, it's not all that scary, and if you strip it down to the bare essentials, it's not a great teen movie either. I think the humor comes from the interplay between those two things and some truly excellent comedic dialogue. It's a little bit of Mean Girls, a little bit of Carrie, a little bit of, Deathgasm? Watching it the first time, I thought, this dialogue reminds me of Juno. Come to find out, Jennifer's Body is not just written by the same person as Juno, but also produced by Jason Reitman, its director. As far as dialogue is concerned, I think this is leaps and bounds ahead of Juno, because the dated parts are almost self-aware that they are of their time and lean into the ruthless aloofness of its target demographic. If you miss that or don't get it, then you're out of luck in enjoying Jennifer's Body. But even still, it seems like there was this resistance to Jennifer's Body for a long time, even as a cult hit. You can say the plot's ridiculous, the effects aren't that great, the tone is all over the place, but I don't really think that's why. Why was this considered bad? That's easy. Megan Fox was in it. This came out the same year as Transformers 2. Everybody hated Megan Fox. She was seen as the pinnacle of a terrible actress who only got roles because she was hot. Many of these people, ironically, grew up to be Margot Robbie fans, but for a movie that takes such advantage of her appearance as a part of the plot, it seemed too self-aware about who Megan Fox was and why she was popular. It's called Jennifer's Body. This is the poster. You'd be forgiven for thinking it's nothing but Fox submitting herself to objectification. It's like casting Ryan Gosling in a horror movie called Jonathan's Cock. Kinda narrows down the focus there. Megan Fox is on another planet in this. She delivers what must be hundreds of ridiculous lines and plays every single one of them completely straight. She does not crack once.
Needy and Colin were intimate. And by that, I mean they were porking on a semi-regular basis.
The sheer confidence in Fox's poise and delivery is what holds the movie together. It is so fucking funny. The whole movie really exists in its own little borderline fanficky world that never truly gives up the facade. It expects you'll know what it's doing when the meek, antisocial protagonist is played by Amanda Seyfried. It knows exactly how to visually get across the appeal of its tone. This was the era where hyper-emphasizing orange and teal, or washing out your colors altogether, were the two dominant ways a lazy movie would try to give itself an edge. It may sound and act like vaguely similar edgy films, but Jennifer's Body is visually engaging in ways these supernatural teen pandering movies can only dream of. Imagine Twilight, but vibrant with life, and actors actually enjoying what they're putting in front of you. But this movie has incredible rewatchability because there's no bullshit. It's not long into the movie at all before you see Jennifer as full-on Evil Dead, covered in blood and vomiting what looks like a mixture of tar and pine needles. It establishes its premise very quickly, and uses the saved time to indulge in characters and ideas it thinks are funny. Like J.K. Simmons playing the most Minnesotan man ever made. He also has a hook hand. Okay. You are the director of Jennifer's Body. The scene is, a football player is standing outside alone. Jennifer goes up to him and says, "Hi." How would you film that? You have your options. So you turn on the spiciest metalcore 2009 could buy and do a 15-second dolly zoom from across the realm. Funniest shit I've ever seen. But in terms of being misunderstood, the tone is really only half the story. Jennifer's Body uses horror schlock to mask a story about the very real tribulations that are part of coming of age as a teen girl. Most obviously how women are crushed by a societally conditioned need for approval. I mean, Amanda Seyfried's character is named Needy. It's pretty clear what's going on as far as she's concerned. Jennifer is the stereotypical icon of an approved woman, but still feels an insecurity she can't explain. While she's confident and knows she's desirable at the moment, Jennifer has some understanding that she has no control over her status. Eating these boys is a reversal of the power dynamic between her and the people who only want her because of how well she meets their standards. There's a growing tension between her and Needy on account of the latter's boyfriend's genuine, if quaint, care for her as a person, something Jennifer can't find despite her being, by the film's standards, more deserving of that affection. I love the layers to Jennifer and Needy's relationship. The lesbian... I don't think I can call it subtext because it's just what happens in the movie. They demonstrate love beyond the platonic for each other in every way besides a forthright declaration. I don't think it's implying Needy is dissatisfied with her pre-existing hetero relationship, but nobody in the right mind can deny that dynamic exists in the film, especially given how sexuality is such a centralizing theme in the movie. One could easily argue Jennifer is in love with Needy, and devouring these boys is a metaphor for her trying to bury her true feelings behind overcompensating heterosexuality. She doesn't want to eat young Neil just because it's for taking Needy away from her. When you consider Jennifer's underlying motivation is the inability to come to terms with a love she doesn't even know how to explain going unrequited, there's a much appreciated element of identifiable tragedy that keeps her relatable. Jennifer also has her roots in revenge movies like I Spit on Your Grave. There's a drawn-out scene of her being abused and ultimately killed by a group of boys. Yeah, it's pretty easy to assume what the writers were going for there, without having to actually show it. Just as we're shown Jennifer penetrating her victims with her teeth at the apex of her seductions in place of an on-screen sex act, so too is the case with the knife penetrating her as she's stabbed to death. What's odd is how little her death and subsequent possession change Jennifer's outward characterization. She doesn't even go after the people who did this to her. I won't spoil how this gets resolved, but it takes a few established horror conventions and lessens their rigidity for a payoff that unfortunately stops short of being just as satisfying as it probably was on paper. For the length and structure they went with, fully realizing their idea was just impossible. Where the movie actually ends would have to be the end of the second act for it to have worked. One convention Jennifer's body plays with is that the victim in the revenge story serves as the primary antagonist. Killing these boys has its metaphorical purposes, but the surface level story still treats this as a bad thing and gets into the rigmarole of her as any number of possession movie characters. Many fans of the film deeply identify with Jennifer's struggles, and whether thematically or literally, don't think she did anything wrong, and the fact she's thwarted at all is what makes her a tragic character. And I mean, yeah, her death does elicit our sympathy, but I think there's an added dimension to it that comes from Needy and Jennifer's lesbianism. The final confrontation between the two is not only another queer-coded exchange between them, but a moment that wholly solidifies Jennifer has lost Needy's love. I think the tragedy comes from how Jennifer's sexual frustration ends up hurting her best friend to the point where she's become a toxic fixture to her. A woefully wronged character trying to salvage her humanity still went a bridge too far. I won't get into every little detail, but Jennifer's demise is effectively her resigning to how she feels about Needy. I think the tragic notes play so well specifically because the movie doesn't take itself very seriously. But that nuance is still there. Jennifer's body spends most of its time being quirky and trying to make you laugh. It lets you discover the tragedy for yourself, which is inevitably more rewarding and engaging than just spelling it out for you. If there's any issue with Jennifer's body, the plot doesn't make a whole lot of sense sometimes. Amanda Seyfried breaks up with her boyfriend, and there's really no reason for it. Which, first of all, how? The resolution is a little ham-fisted. It has one of those scenes where somebody reads about the demon or possession at the library, and just by happenstance finds out the exact right information they need to stop them. You can tell the writer really needed an easy out to solve the plot. You expect the climax to be framed around a school dance, which Needy seems to think will excite Jennifer's cannibalism due to how many people will be there, even though, logically, the same amount of people at the dance should be at school every day. Why does Needy have a pencil sharpener screwed to her kitchen window? And she has a psychic connection with Jennifer for like one scene, and, they never explain that. I think that even though the way this film addresses tone is seriously misunderstood, little bits that are maybe too cheesy briefly poke their heads up, but that's really it. I thoroughly love this movie. The fact that it was dismissed as a male-gazy Twilight knockoff when it's so much more fun, thoughtful, and creative than that is a sore wound of missed opportunity. I love its sense of humor. I love how not sorry it is for any of its silliness. In its approach to soundtrack, dialogue, acting, and more, Jennifer's Body was deceptively ahead of its time. and yet somehow so perfectly hamstrung by its time. I think we're never gonna see another movie like it again because the conditions under which it was made are irreplicable. That specific mix of late 2000s twee occult fascination, transcendent dismissive wit, and Megan Fox giving a performance only she could have given at only that time in her career. It is the definition of lightning in a bottle. So for my second recommendation, how about we offset Jennifer's Body, a fascinating mix of dated and ahead of its time, with something that's so dated and completely of its time, it turns into unironic charm. Sleepaway Camp is a low-budget slasher movie from 1983 about a killer loose in a summer camp picking off the kids one at a time. The production value is admittedly low. A guy gets killed by getting a beehive dropped on him, but there are no bees? Cool. Like Jennifer's Body, it's not exactly highbrow, but there's still a merit to it. If you're watching Sleepaway Camp looking for, like, The Shining or Hereditary, that's more of a you problem than a Sleepaway Camp problem. It's one of my absolute favorite slasher movies, period. But the sheer early 80s low-budget cheese makes it so much better as a Halloween movie. The first thing you'll notice about Sleepaway Camp is the music. Kind of being a little dramatic there, aren't you, Sleepaway Camp? It's like the evil version of the Saved by the Bell stinger.
Guys, we struck oil.
Guys, there's been an oil spill. There's oil everywhere.
So hey, the next time you get past the aux cord and your friend says, dude, you better not play trash, you know where the f*** to go. Sleepaway Camp theme. Trust me, guys, okay? It'll be a big hit on TikTok. But let's break down Sleepaway Camp a little. You got Angela, you got her cousin, and his friend Paul, who likes Angela. But the cousin Ricky had a thing with Judy, who along with fellow Mean Girl counselor Meg feel entitled to attention because they got boobs. So entitled, in fact, Judy can't stand that Paul likes Angela when she don't got no boobs. Because logically, he should like the one who do got the boobs, aka Judy. Meanwhile, Ricky gets in all kinds of fights and shouting matches both to protect Angela and because he's probably insecure about these older boys winning Judy over. And in the background of all of this, people are just getting murked. Now that might sound like a Disney Channel movie by the guy who directed Maniac, which already sounds amazing. All this drama is merely an excuse to string together lines and deliveries that are overwhelmingly magical.
Eat shit and die, Ricky!
Eat shit and live, Bill.
How the hell did that get there?
She's a real carpenter's dream. The light is a board and needs a screw.
Yo, Angela, how come you're so fucked up?
Yo, Angela, how come you're so f***ed up? Then you have this guy, Mel. He's the only character taking the killer situation seriously. But he's so bad at it.
We don't know anything for sure yet.
I know. I've known all along. I've seen the hate in his eyes. But I never did anything.
You expect a character with gravitas to be the sober one waxing poetic about the killer, a la Dr. Loomis, but Mel is just a schlubby old guy upset the killer got to the underage counselor who set on banging him for some reason. As a horror movie, Sleepaway Camp is not particularly scary. It's more about the kills and the characters. And even though it looks pretty low budget, there's some solid effects in here. The gore on the chef who gets scalded and the scene where Billy dies is great. And Mel getting shot with the arrow is a genuinely good effect. It reminds me of Kevin Bacon's death in Friday the 13th. No two kills are alike, and despite being over the top sometimes, are creative in their own varied hilarity. It even manages to be gruesome without even showing the kill sometimes. I love this counselor's reaction to one of the kids drowning is...
I don't know. I was just thinking. I remember that boy being a pretty damn good swimmer.
I like to imagine he responds the exact same way when all the other characters die. You know, I remember that kid being a pretty damn good beekeeper. Yeah, that's funny. I remember that girl being a pretty damn good hairdresser.
It can't be!
Huh, that's funny. I remember Mel being a pretty damn good archer. There's a lot of other fun, campy stuff in this. You got this police officer who shaved his mustache halfway through filming, so at the end they replaced it with like black electrical tape. This guy is played by James Earl Jones' dad.
They're too young to even understand what's on your mind.
And I'll say that Felissa Rose, who plays Angela, does a great job making you sympathize with, creeped out by, and eventually pity her. This is one of the gayest movies ever, and I love it so much. The fellas here ask the girls to go skinny dipping with them, and when they're like no, they're like, man, f these hoes. The boys are getting naked anyway. You got dude's face and boy ass. You got this dude wearing these absolute jorts. You got multiple scenes of boys just hurling themselves on top of each other. The only part of Sleepaway Camp that the average person might know it for is the ending. The movie puts up the front of a whodunit mystery, but most people could probably guess Angela's the killer. It's not that hard to figure out. And in case you haven't heard what the ending of the film actually is, despite its cult following, it's best experienced not knowing to expect, so fair warning for spoilers. So the counselors start searching the camp for the killer and find Angela on the beach with Paul. Well, actually just his head. She's the killer, woo! But the important part is... Angela's a boy.
God, she's a boy.
1983 was absolutely not ready for this twist. Surprisingly well foreshadowed and disturbing, this wide-eyed, mouth-agape Angela is the last thing we see. And of course, the music from the beginning is back, and it still goddamn slaps. There's an argument to be made that the twist being a character was cross-dressing, especially when that twist focuses on your horror villain, is pretty dated. And not in an innocent, harmless way. I think it really depends how you look at it. If you want to decode the ending, you start veering away from having Halloween fun time and talking about some, you know, real shit. But I don't think the point is to villainize transsexualism, nor is it really a man in a dress cliche like Buffalo Bill. Because Angela's not really a transsexual. Her real sex is male, but was forced into a female gender expression. The expectation to perform as one gender when you're actually another, that's where the horror comes from. The shock of Angela being a boy, for me, comes from how one would expect her being the killer to be the whole twist. But that extra dimension makes so much of the story make sense. The whole movie, Judy resents Angela for not following her image of femininity. When Paul expects her to perform as a female during sex, she starts dissociating. The gender dysphoric character is the de facto villain, but the forces that drive Angela's villainy are rooted in other people coded as maliciously cisnormative, not the dysphoria itself. The victims in the movie kind of wrought their own fate here. Not sure if a 1983 movie is that forward-thinking, or if my interpretation has even been the predominant legacy of this character. But it goes to show the stupidity of mainstream audiences if a movie about a character pressured into the wrong gender identity, exacting vengeance on those who further mock their performance of that identity, somehow fueled their transphobia. Congratulations, mainstream audience, you made the Lion King remake the 7th highest grossing movie of all time and ruined Sleepaway Camp. But this is all serious stuff. The ending's freaky enough with Angela staring at you like that as the frame morphs into a photo negative. Unless the ending turns them off, like, thematically, I have a hard time imagining anybody who goes into it with the right mindset hating Sleepaway Camp. Have a little fun, why don't you? We are now at my final Halloween recommendation. What is it going to be, you must be wondering? Well, it's something brashly seasonal, something that matches the scrappy, human quality of the holiday. It's something that you can appreciate in the season of crappy homemade costumes and hokey decorations. One of the most iconic killers in cinema doesn't hurt either. I am, of course, talking about Halloween 5. Nobody seems to like this movie. At least nobody I've met. And you know, I kind of get it. Halloween 5 is pretty sloppy, and you don't have to look that hard to find stuff to hate. And despite liking it quite a bit, I have to begin with a complaint of my own. I know this movie was rushed, but the opening credits are so lazy it's not even funny. Just orange text on a black background intercut with these quick shots of slashing knives. It's so cheap and lame, and the music is this stock, muddy mess. The thing is that its predecessor, Halloween 4, had the best opening credits out of all of them. The first Halloween has that slow zoom in on the jack-o'-lantern with the piano. You know, that's a classic. But Halloween 4... you have open shots of Midwestern autumn farmland against an overcast, murky sky, set to this ambient chanting and howling wind. Man, I love this shit. The ramshackle decorations, the fog and barren trees, the abandoned-looking equipment and buildings in the foreground. It does such a great job pulling you into the sinister atmosphere of the season. Like the familiar aesthetic is a thin barrier hiding something unidentifiably sinister. It's asserting itself as a story worthy of the name Halloween, as if it's the best possible distillation of the holiday. Only problem is, Halloween 4 is not that story and is, in fact, boring as hell. So, what you do is take the credits of Halloween 4 and splice them into Halloween 5. Because both movies are on YouTube and I can do that. The font's not perfect, but at least now you can watch both these movies with credit sequences that are tonally appropriate. Halloween 4 being boring and lame, and Halloween 5 looking like it was shot on some dude's family farm. Halloween 5 is noticeably rushed and cheap looking, though not because of the budget. The entire movie start to finish was made in less than a year on a $6 million budget, the most expensive Halloween movie at the time. It turned a $5 million profit, but that was only half of what Halloween 4 made him. And when you look at the blockbusters it had to compete against that year, it's not really a surprise people chose to see Batman, or Ghostbusters 2, or Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or Weekend at Bernie's, or License to Kill, or The Little Mermaid, or Back to the Future 3, or Lethal Weapon 2, or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, or Star Trek 5, or fucking UHF over this. After Halloween 4 proved rerouting the franchise to be about Michael Myers again wouldn't guarantee bigger profits, you can see producers losing faith in the series and writers having no idea where to take it. An oft-criticized part of this movie is the introduction of the Thorn icon and the Man in Black character, both of which have no expressed purpose because the writers themselves hadn't thought of one. This is a weird time for the franchise, the direct midpoint between where fans seemed to enjoy the movies and when they started getting so ridiculously bad they were at least interesting to talk about? For me, though, the cheap look comes back around to being part of the charm. There is no polish to it. Not to like a Manos degree, though. It looks like a movie that, given enough time and money, I could have made. It probably helps that studios don't put as many eggs in one basket as they do now, so worst case is they lose $6 million instead of $150. The lack of time as a resource means every aspect couldn't be workshopped to perfection. But since basically nothing is riding on its success, there was no motivation to try and fix it with some slapped-together gimmick. There's a kind of grit to everything. It doesn't look like there's a ton of intricate production design that was added to the locations besides what was already there. Most people besides Dr. Loomis are doing all their own stunts. I swear absolutely nothing was added in post besides Foley, I guess. It's so unadulterated and mellow that the longer it goes on, the bleaker and nigh post-apocalyptic Halloween 5 feels. There's a part where some characters stumble into a barn, and it's so realistically quiet. It gives me the same sense of unease when I'm somewhere alone, and something in my brain says the lack of sound just has to be because there's somebody nearby trying not to make noise sneaking up on me. Characters who fill more active roles in the story, like Loomis, Tina, and especially Jamie, seem genuinely afraid of Michael in this film. For once in this kind of movie, the characters look and sound like they're being chased by a serial killer, as opposed to part 4 where he's treated like a haunted house set piece that pops up whenever it's appropriately spooky. Halloween 5's Michael is far more relentless in his pursuit of the characters. The real reasons to watch Halloween 5 are the sheer bleakness of its tone, or the genuinely interesting and entertaining characters. Halloween 5 has one of the best child performances ever in our main character, Jamie Lloyd. She was great in part 4, but 5 treats her more like a main character. Halloween 5 spends a lot of time to show just how much Jamie is affected by Michael across this and the last movie. She has equal footing with Laurie in terms of how much they've had to deal with Michael. But not only was Jamie a kid through her encounters with him and therefore more vulnerable, but her movies concentrate more on how she's been transformed physically and mentally by those encounters. She's gone mute, she has night terrors, seizures, and she's stuck in a clinic with a volatile psychic connection to him. Like the fundamentals of her psyche are irreparably damaged. Even though she doesn't face him until the last third, Michael's presence in Jamie's life is always felt whether or not he's around. As if the perpetual state of blanket instability wasn't enough, she's forced into even more violently traumatizing encounters to the point where it almost feels like surviving won't even be a reward due to the mental fallout she's going to have to deal with. And then you get to the ending, where just as the killer's caught, the Man in Black breaks Michael out of jail, and you have to watch the little girl who's been through all this shit suddenly realize her anguish is not over. After 2 movies of trying to escape Michael, everybody who loves Jamie or could protect her is dead, and now Michael is on the loose again, this time with people who want to help him, maybe 30 seconds walking distance from her as she's completely defenseless. Terrified to the point of sobbing, she's so defeated the only response she can muster is a terrified no. Again, apocalyptic bleakness. Danielle Harris is unbelievably good at being scared. She's like a real terrified little kid. This film wouldn't be half as effective if it weren't for this poor little girl having to escape Mike Myers in the middle of a mental breakdown. This girl should have grown up to be a superstar, but she was in basically nothing ever again. I guess she was a Thornberry, so I guess that's fucking something. And then you have Dr. Loomis.
Let's play a game. Catch the little girl. Catch.
Loomis is fucking nuts in this. Every Halloween movie has him talking about how Michael Myers is evil incarnate and must be stopped, which you think would get old, but Loomis gets more paranoid and desperate with each film to the point where in Halloween 5, he's uncomfortable to have around. I've always had this theory that maybe they set it up so they could turn Loomis into a villain if they wanted to in later sequels. Like even in his desire to do the right thing, he was slowly being corrupted by Michael. Cause from Halloween 2 to now, his influence on the Haddonfield Police Department has seemingly gotten larger, where now he can actively manipulate them into doing what he wants. So imagine if he was manipulating them on purpose. I wanted to see a Halloween movie where the characters aren't in any less danger when they're around Loomis as they are around Michael, but this is the closest we get to that. As far as directions you could take the franchise, that's way more interesting than what they did in Part 6 and Resurrection. The teen characters are mostly cannon fodder who only exist to die, but Tina in particular gets on people's nerves. I think they're partly just mad because the main character from Part 4, Rachel, is killed less than an hour in the movie, but like, who the hell cares? She wasn't like a memorable character or anything. With the stereotypical final girl killed first, none of the remaining teens feel like they're vying with Jamie for protagonist status, and it adds to the film's bleak tone when you realize the one who you're supposed to rely on surviving dies first. Tina, who starts as like an airhead sidekick, grows into the closest replacement for a designated final girl. Her sex positivity isn't even seen as a bad thing, which is rare for a slasher. And compared to Rachel, I prefer a final girl like Tina, who's a bit more quirky and off-kilter. Even though they're the least interesting parts of the movie, the teenage characters have good chemistry. You get the vibe that everybody was friends off set too. More than any of the other sequels, Halloween 5 feels like a movie made by people who actively enjoyed the process of making it. Because they did.
She was like a little buddy. I mean, she was with us all the time.
That spirit of genuine care for each other and the fun that we had making the movie, hopefully that comes across in the film as well.
There's some things where I agree with the popular opinion that hates this movie. It was a bad decision to write in characters and ideas, leaving future sequels to explain what they mean. I think a mystery man who's secretly pulling strings to help Michael from the shadows is an idea that could work, but since he was added in the middle of filming, there's no real context for him. Oh, and also there's these two cops who I guess have clown horns shoved up their ass, cause every scene they're in has cartoon sound effects.
All clear.
Nothing above, nothing below.
Just like the credits, I edit those out. The ending of Part 4 is pretty good, but I'm not as upset it was retconned as everyone else seems to be. Like, were you really expecting Jamie to be the killer? 11-year-old Danielle Harris? I guess the guy who finds Michael just letting him lay on his table for like a year is pretty stupid. His mask doesn't look that great, and it's silly watching him float down the river to escape the mob from the end of Part 4. Those parts I just kinda have to be like, must a movie be good to like it? Halloween 5's secret weapon is the pacing. If you hate the teenagers or the comedy relief cops, the movie gradually funnels into only focusing on everything that works, and that lasts for almost the whole last third. It's par for the course that slasher movie subplots disappear when their characters die, but it's just Halloween 5 knows what parts of the story are expendable. The Jamie, Michael, Loomis trifecta is what matters, so if the stuff that's not that bothers you, it's not like you're dealing with it the whole way through. You have that great sequence of Jamie in the laundry chute, Loomis confronting Michael, Michael chasing Jamie in the car with Tina dying to save her life, and that great vulnerable scene of Jamie in the coffin where she almost gets through to Michael. They of course never match up to the first film, but I like it when the Halloween sequels address Michael as psychologically complex instead of just a guy killing people. Part 4 had a similar division of plot between Loomis chasing Michael, teenage drama, and following Jamie around, but mucks it up by making the team drama more prevalent than it needs to be. Jamie is not really a relevant character in 4. 5 gets down to good sequences of the villain we're invested in, chasing the characters we care about, being ruthless and killing everybody else along the way. And that's what makes it work as a slasher.
I think 5 dissipated the interest level of the really diehard fans.
Things that just didn't seem to jibe, and certain things that they didn't seem to take care of.
In the rush to get it done, maybe there was a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But
I guess I'm alone in thinking that.